Hi, my name is Chris Oestreich, and this is my 1985 FXY Glide. So this bike came to me, I was dropping off my friend Matt Gardapi, Ride Drink Camp on Instagram, and he had this bike, which was just a project that Matt started 5 years ago. And I asked him, I'm like, what are you doing with all this stuff? He's like, well, I'm thinking about selling it. I said, selling it? Well, what if I bought it and we built it together? Not many people get to say that they built a bike with their best friend, you know, and this was my opportunity to do that. So I came in on this, it's gonna be my bike, but he's gonna see what this thing's gonna look like at the end of it. You know, he's not selling it to some dude. He's gonna have hands on it and he's gonna be a part of this experience. Little did I know that it would literally torture him to death every step of the way to see a bike that he start, you know, go to finish. This was a hard bike to visualize its completion because it was a bike that was started by somebody else that I was taking on the project, and I wanted to do my best to still use a lot of the things that were started, but also make it my own. And one of the things that was started was the 41mm front end. The lowers were shaved and polished, had to use those, they just looked really good. The visor headlight complemented the 41mm front end pretty well, kind of gave it a nice classic look. The exhaust came out fantastic and I thought it fit the bike really well. So this was a tricky frame to fabricate because 85 was the first year that they put Evos in a Y glide frame. So they had to create a hump just to make room to fit the Evo engine into it. And then finding a hardtail for a 1-year bike was also tricky. The project was already started, but there were some things that needed to be figured out. The fender was done by 7 Metal West. The sissy bar was done by my friend Ian. He did all the fabricating in his garage. He literally said, how tall do you want it? He did all the math, he marked it up on his welding table. He welded the pivot points to the welding table. And we sat there with the torch on the table until it was cherry red, bending it. It came out absolutely perfect when we were done. Yeah, so the oil pan fit, it's the TT style oil pan, originally made for like shovelhead and knuckleheads. It's shorter, and this is quite literally the only horseshoe oil pan that will fit into this frame with just how this 1 year is and all that stuff. And it's tight. If you can see that the oil pan barely just clears the frame and also the clutch arm. This oil tank was tricky because the oil lines will not clear these Evo heads. The only solution that I found was to cut the nipples off and weld in a bung so I could screw in my own 90-degree MPT fittings so that way they come straight down out of the oil tank to clear the exhaust pipe, and they still just barely do that. So I wanted to do something a little bit different than just like your standard king queen. I wanted to create that passage just for no other reason other than just looks. What I didn't know is I was actually creating a little bit of a scenario where we had to fasten that back pad to the sissy bar and make it look clean. So we actually had to get creative. We used the Prism Supply taillight box light, and we actually got longer bolts to pass through the taillight to go into the back pad itself. So it's actually the taillight that's fastening the back pad to the sissy bar. I went with Prism Supply, their taillight, because it was small and compact. Not to mention that they're super, super bright. The engine has some work done to it. It's a 10 over Evo. It's got 10-to-1 Wiseco domed pistons on it. It's got Kibble white valves, fueling beehive springs. It's got S&S roller rockers, Andrews push rods, S&S tappets, S&S 565 cam. Thing goes. I chose green because anybody that knows me and knows motorcycles knows that I have the absolute worst luck with motorcycles. I've blown up 2 engines myself, rebuilt them. So the reason why I chose green is because I know that it's bad luck. And with this bike, I felt confident with it. I wanted to kind of meet the bad luck head on with it. And I was like, the only way I can do that is by painting this bike green. So the name of the bike is Bud, because my grandpa, his nickname growing up was actually Bud. I still remember hearing my great-grandma and my great-grandpa calling him Bud when we would go visit. I decided to take the name and put it on the points cover. That name written out is actually my grandma's handwriting that I took a piece of paper and a pen to her and said, can you write Grandpa's nickname Bud? And I took it to a metal etcher and I had him etch the exact signature that she wrote out and put it on. There's a lot of people to thank for this bike. First and foremost, it's got to be Matt Gardapi for hanging in with me throughout this build. I know that I was using his garage, so I can only imagine how, fast he wanted this thing out of there towards the end of it all. Got to thank Ian for just taking the time to do some of these intricate welding, these final welds for me, and just helping me to make this bike is what it is right now. Buzz for just kind of being a guy that I could call and ask a question. He was a big help when it came to hardware. Have to thank Brian Radman for teaching me how to wire this thing up. He literally drew out a diagram for me and said, this is what you need to do. I said, cool, I can do that. I gotta thank John Holter for the paint. He just absolutely nailed it. If I could give any advice to anybody that wants to build a bike is one, just do it. But two, if you have any buddies that build bikes, be a sponge. Absorb as much information as you can from them. Ask them for help. Don't be shy. Like, you're gonna get hung up. You're not gonna know everything. Building this with a friend, building this with a mentor was the only way that this bike would have been finished.